Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Instagram Live. My name is Stevie Dram, and I'm excited to be your host for this Ask Me Anything session today. I'm joined today by Francis Webb, our incredible career services specialist, who will be answering your questions about career development services and the resources we offer at PACE. As part of the senior leadership team at PACE, I have the privilege of working across many areas that impact the student experience. While my role is usually more behind the scenes, I'm thrilled to facilitate this session and help connect you with the valuable expertise of our career services team. Feel free to drop your questions in the comments throughout the session, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible. To get us started, I'll ask Francis some of the most common questions we hear from students. But first, Francis, can you introduce yourself to us and tell us a little bit about your role?
Absolutely. Thank you, Stevie. So I am Pace's Career Services Specialist, and I've been in this role for almost a year now. Although LinkedIn tells me I've been with Pace, I just celebrated my 6-year anniversary here. So I started as an instructor with Pace, mostly in the Educational Assistant Diploma program, and did some course development over the years as well. I used to be a teacher, which is what led me to PACE in the first place. So I taught high school, mostly English as an additional language and EAL support for many, many years before transitioning into career development and retraining. And I'm very happy to be here now helping PACE students to realize their career goals.
Great. We're glad that you're with us too. So let's start with maybe a little bit of an overview. Can you tell us what resources are available to our PACE students in the career development area?
Absolutely. So PACE Career Services is designed across basically 4 pillars of support. So we offer webinars, which are delivered by myself and cover a variety of career development topics. So those are usually once a month. I do a series of more kind of intense in-person workshops that occur at 3 points during the year for our students who are approaching the end of their studies. I work with those same students one-on-one. Again, whatever kind of career development support they need, they can book one-on-one appointments with me. And the fourth pillar then is what we call partnered presentations, which are similar to the webinars. And with the exception that I bring in someone from an outside organization to talk to the students about usually a career development adjacent topic. For example, this afternoon we've got one on LinkedIn from a presenter at Manitoba Start.
Oh, excellent. And I know this is a very common question. What kind of supports uh, does career services provide to students who are looking for part time work while studying?
I do get quite a bit of requests for that kind of support. Unfortunately, there's 900 or so PACE students and only one of me, so I have to focus my time on those students approaching graduation and alumni. But we do offer some supports for students looking for part-time work while studying. So, in conjunction with Manitoba Start, which for those of you that might not be in Manitoba yet, they're an immigrant serving nonprofit organization. So we developed together a webinar which we've called Transitional Work, which is all about how to adapt your resume and search for a part-time role whilst you're studying. We have a career services SharePoint site as well, and through that site, students can contact me with any questions that they have. Occasionally, they'll send me a resume to look at and just make sure everything's good to go before they start sending out those applications. So there are certain supports available for those students interested in part-time work.
Okay, great. So, talking about the services you offer and the tools and resources, how do students access those? How are they available?
So most career services supports are available to students through that website I mentioned. So we have a very secure internal SharePoint site which houses all of our resources. Through that site, which students have access to, through their nexus, which is kind of the student support D2L infrastructure. They can access that site, I think, a week or so before their program begins, even. So it's right from the beginning, it's set up for you. The site is full of great resources that students can study by themselves and browse. But there's also links in that site to book an appointment with me. Every event we set up, every webinar and presentation has an event page with lots of information about it, and then a link to register for that webinar. There's the contact form and a whole bunch of other stuff, including a job listing page, which I update frequently. So students can access just about everything career service related through that site. Alumni usually just keep my email and contact me that way. And of course, many students connect with me on LinkedIn as well. So however students like to get in touch with me, I don't mind.
Great. So, can you share with us the types of career-focused webinars, workshops, or what you can expect in a one-on-one meeting? All those kind of services that you offered. So,
Absolutely, yeah. The webinars we do focus specifically on career development topics, so and they cycle around. So there's a variety of them. Probably the most popular and the most commonly requested one is called Resume Development One, and it focuses on developing what's called a master resume. So it's kind of the first exposure most PACE students have to resume writing. They'll attend that webinar with me, usually fairly early on in the studies. PACE offers a resume building course, which then goes into a lot more detail. And then they come back to me at the end for the Resume Development 2 workshop, which is kind of a more intense refresher before they graduate. One that has been surprisingly very popular as a webinar is cover letter development, which I created from scratch because there aren't a lot of there's lots of kind of online supports for resume building and stuff, but I found there's a real dearth of cover letter supports available online. So I made that a few months ago, and we've already run it a couple of times. Students request it regularly, and it's actually been a lot of fun to develop and run that one. So like I say, those webinars cycle throughout the year. There's at least one every month. The workshops then focus on so Resume Development 2, which focuses on targeted resumes or the resume you're actually going to send out to employers, and then interview preparation, which is a very intensive workshop that gets students prepared for the types of questions you'll face in a Canadian job interview and kind of expectations for behaviors and things like that in a job interview, how to navigate virtual interviews and stuff like that. Then again, in the last 3 months of studies, when students are approaching graduation, they can book those one-on-one appointments with me. We can recover any of those topics and more. We can even go all the way back to kind of career planning or job search or something like that. If students come to me for interview prep in a one-on-one meeting, I'll do a mock interview for them. And those supports are available to alumni as well as students approaching graduation with, right now, no expiry dates. So I've even met a few students who graduated before I even started in this current role. So students can come back and see me as long as they need to.
I wish I had those services when I was in school. I'll tell you that. Learned through the hard way. So, speaking about resumes, what are some of the biggest resume challenges that newcomers to Canada face, and how do you help those students overcome those challenges?
I think probably the single biggest challenge that newcomers face when they're coming to Canada, and it's the same in the States, it's a North American phenomenon where I would say in most of the rest of the world, most people maintain a CV, a curriculum vitae, which is a resume format that tends to have everything you've ever done or most of the jobs that you've done on it. In North America, the CV is actually a very rarely used resume format. It's only typically used by academic professionals and scientific professionals. So a university professor might have a CV, a laboratory scientist might have a CV, but for most other professions, it's considered too long. Typically, most kind of low to mids and even senior level positions, you want a two-page kind of more tailored resume. 3 pages max for like a senior level position. So it can be a big challenge getting that CV, which is sometimes 3, 4, even 5 pages long, down to 2 pages, more concise and more focused to the type of work that you're applying for. So a big part of that resume development one webinar I mentioned is trimming that master resume, which is going to be a template for all the other resumes you create, down to about 2 pages and keeping it relevant to the types of job you want to apply for.
Great advice. So, I just want to remind everyone watching, if you have a question, please pop it in the chat and we'll make sure that we get to that. So, in relation to resume challenges, what advice would you give to a student who, say, doesn't have any prior experience in the field they are studying?
So yeah, most PACE students do have a little bit of experience in the field they're studying, but we do get occasionally students who have maybe like an office or administrative background, but maybe are transitioning into, let's say, human resources or something like that to our HRM program, and don't have HR specific background experience, for example. So what I would recommend they do is go with a format of resume which is maybe a functional resume or a skills-based resume, and it focuses on the transferable skills they're going to bring from that role into a new role in a new field in let's say HR. So yeah, if someone's got that administrative background, then they have probably very strong organizational skills, very strong time management skills, let's say, and those are important in many professions, including HR. So the functional resume format or skills-based resume format allows the applicant to draw the focus onto those transferable skills. And the work experience is kind of shunted to the back of the resume. Typically, on a functional resume, you only include a limited selection of work experience anyway, because it's not the focus of that resume. So typically, I'd advise a student to start with a functional resume, and then I'd also get them maybe to put the education section of their resume, which is usually at the back, one of the last things on the resume, and bring it closer to the front. So it's maybe the second thing after the profile section to highlight that fantastic pace education that they're currently studying.
Okay, great. Uh, how about if a student has relevant experiences from a long time ago and their recent experience is somewhat different from what they're applying for?
That can be tricky because most people like a chronological format resume, but if the most recent jobs you have aren't particularly relevant, especially if you have been studying or working part-time while you study, you might have a job that's your most recent job and therefore the first job employers are going to see. That's not necessarily the best job for them to see or not necessarily the most relevant. So you want them to know about that prior experience from a few years back. So I'd either encourage a student to create a functional resume like we talked about before and focus on the skills they're bringing from that past position and the skills they're developing in their education and show the employer how those can apply to the new role. Or if they really want to stick with a chronological resume format, I'd encourage them to split the work experience section into two, and you start with a relevant work experience section, which is still in chronological order, but maybe starts a few years ago to showcase those older, more relevant jobs. And then you follow that with an additional work experience section, which shows everything else that you've done, again in chronological order, but we're bringing those relevant jobs to the forefront of the resume. So those are the first things we want the employer to see.
Oh, well, I've never heard of that one. I like that.
It's a good trick.
That's a good trick. Yeah. Okay, so what if a student has significant experience but is unsure if they should include a part-time job they recently started on their resume?
I usually suggest, if you have any, and many of our students are international students, so showcasing Canadian work experience, whatever it is, always has value. So even if you feel like your part-time job while studying is, low level, not relevant, etc., it still has a place on the resume. It's not necessarily the first thing we want the employer to know about you, but let's say, you work in a grocery store as a cashier, that might not be relevant to the AI diploma that you're studying and the IT jobs that you're applying for, but showing the employer you have that experience shows them that your English is probably really good because you're dealing with English speaking customers on a daily basis. You have cash handling handling skills, which can be important in certain roles or at least demonstrate, certain mathematical abilities. There are certain skills that that's going to showcase. So having it on your resume is important. But again, I wouldn't put it in like right at the top of the work experience section. I'd either create a functional resume that demonstrates those skills or split the work experience and list that under additional experience.
Okay, great. So, um, next question I have is about interview skills. So, I've interviewed a lot of people over my tenure,
Yeah.
and I've interviewed a lot of PACE internships. I always take intern as often as I can, and they always come in. Some are more nervous than others. So, how do you help them overcome the nervousness and be, in those interview situations?
That's a great question, and I often tell students I wish I had a magic wand that could just take the nervousness away and relax them, but the truth is it's very different for everyone. Some people are very confident in job interviews, and that nervousness is never an issue for them. Other people can be great at job interviews, but their nerves get the better of them and hold them back. I think the best thing you can do to overcome nerves is to be prepared for an interview, and in my experience in career development, I would say most people either don't prepare at all for a job interview. They think they can just kind of go in and wing it, or that they have no choice but to go in and wing it, or they do far too little preparation. And the truth is, there's actually a lot we can do to prepare for interviews. Probably the single biggest thing I do on a daily basis is interview prep one-on-one with students. Those mock interview sessions are very popular as students come back to me for them time and again, and it's great. I really enjoy doing it. And you can get quite a good idea of what they might ask you in an interview by studying a few things like the job ads, like the company's Indeed profile, like the company website. You can get a good idea of what's important to that company. And while you might not be able to predict exactly the questions they're going to ask, you can get a really good read on what they're going to ask you about. So preparing a few anecdotes in advance can really help you. And it's not about memorizing them, of course, but just having that information at the forefront of your mind and practicing how you might work those anecdotes and experiences into a conversation can help you feel a lot more prepared and like, oh, I do have a lot of good stuff to bring to this job in this interview. And if I can tell them about these achievements that I've made and figure out how to work them into the conversation, then they're going to see how much value I could bring to the organization, and that's going to naturally help you feel more confident. So preparing, just doing anything to prepare, whether it's coming to see me for a mock interview session or even just at home studying the job ads, studying the company website, doing a bit of research just to kind of give you an idea of what you might expect in that interview can go a long way to helping deal with those nerves.
Great tips. Um, our offices are close to each other, and
Mhm.
I hear you meeting with students all the time. So, now I know what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Lots of mock interviews.
Lots of market engineers, yeah.
Okay, I got a question from Marketer Wiz. And I think you'll be able to shed some light on this. I mean, we don't expect you to know the exact answer, but um, how do you describe the job market right now in Winnipeg?
The job market in Canada is in a bit of a recession. In Winnipeg, I feel like we're not hit as big as the larger centers like Toronto and Vancouver. So students aren't having too much trouble getting jobs, which is great. And it's especially those that are seeking out the services available to them, whether that's coming to me or to an organization like Manitoba Start and getting career development support. Those students are doing very, very well and getting jobs. So it's certainly not the strongest it's ever been, but in Winnipeg in particular, things are actually pretty okay. So if you're reading international news and it looks like Canada's in a bit of a slump, which it is, um, we're not as affected by that in Winnipeg as some other parts of the country. I can say one area that's seeing quite like very positive job growth right now is accounting. So if you're looking through our PACE programs and wondering what to take, financial management might be a good choice.
Yeah, just to add to that, we've done a survey of past graduates. I think our employment rate after graduation was in the high 80s. I want to say about 87.
It was something
So,
very
yeah,
like that.
so there, we don't graduate a ton of people, so, and we do that for a reason to kinda keep a finger on the job market. We don't wanna be putting
Absolutely.
hundreds of people out there that are not likely to get employed in their fields. So let's switch a little bit now to people that are looking to get their PR, so their permanent residencies. So for students that are hoping to secure a job that aligns with their permanent residency goals, what advice would you give them to maximize their chances?
So, there's a few different pathways to permanent residency, which I'm sure Depeng talked about last week in his AMA. And it can be difficult kind of navigating that field. So we're very lucky to have Depeng, and I usually send those kind of questions his way. But when students have permanent residency as one of their kind of immediate goals, I tend to try and do some career planning with them and get them to set some short-term career goals. And I usually tell them choose one career goal that aligns with that permanent residency goal and one that's like a short-term goal. You're ready to apply for this job, but it's maybe going to take a bit longer. So if I can go back, or let's say we're talking about one of our advanced business management students, one of the lower level jobs that they have no trouble getting is administrative assistant, and it's not necessarily an end game job, but it's easy to get. There's lots out there, and they're very qualified for that position, and it is considered an in demand occupation for permanent residency. So I might say to them, if you want to be in a management role, set business manager of some kind as one of your career goals, but understand that might take a little longer to get. So set administrative assistant as your second goal, apply for both of those kinds of jobs. Maybe you'll get lucky and get that management job very quickly, but that's not always the reality for everybody. It is a reality that you're probably going to get that administrative assistant job quite quickly. You can do that for a short period of time, work on your PR, and the whole time you're still gathering labor market information, maybe sending out resumes for more management style positions. And that way you're kind of addressing both of those goals simultaneously. You're going to reach PR quickly and also advance your career towards whatever that second goal might be.
Okay. I have a couple questions in the comments here. So the first one is they're asking, can you help me review a resume that's been tailored for a role? So maybe that speaks to who you're able to support and what kind of services.
Yeah, and maybe it's a good time to talk about, because I've mentioned targeted resumes and master resumes, but we might have some viewers that don't aren't familiar with those terms because, like I said, it's not so common outside of North America to have these different types of resumes. In many countries, you just submit your CV and that's it. So we develop a master resume, which is kind of more like the CV, only it's fairly tailored to the type of job we're applying for. So an HR person's master resume will mostly contain HR relevant type jobs, not necessarily HR jobs, but those with transferable skills, They might not include that job in fast food you had 15 years ago or something like that, like a CV might, but it's going to be a larger snapshot of what you've done. From that resume, whenever we apply for a job, it's kind of expected the resume we submit is going to be tailored to the job we're applying to, and specifically the job ads. And the reason for that is many companies will use an applicant tracking system to scan the resume. So that's computer software, which is going to look for keywords from the job ad in your resume and generate a percentage match rating. And employers, because many employers have, hundreds of applications for some jobs, they don't have the time to read 300 resumes. So they scan it with the ATS. The ATS generates this match rating report, and then they know which kind of 20 or 30 resumes they actually want to take a closer look at. So that's why we create a targeted resume. And a big part of what I do is helping students create those targeted resumes. Now, the person who asked this, if they're a current student, for example, typically I do targeted resume development with students who are approaching graduation because it's more important for those kind of mid-level jobs. For getting a part-time job while studying, as long as your master resume is fairly, focused to the type of job you want to get. If you want a customer service job, it's going to focus on communication skills. You don't need to do so much targeting with those. So typically, if you're towards the end of your studies or an alumni, I can absolutely help create those targeted resumes, and it's a big part of what I do. We currently have access to an online tool called JobScan for our students, and JobScan is an AI-powered tool that I really like it. A lot of AI will attempt to like write a resume for you, and they're not generally good resumes. JobScan uses AI to pick out keywords and help you target your resume, so it's like one word at a time. It's a time-saving tool, and it really helps our students to create those targeted resumes easily and quickly.
Awesome. Let's get a couple more questions here. So one is from an alumni. Can alumni return for resume support? They've been exploring a job change.
Absolutely. Please come and see me. Contact Pace Registration. They'll put you in touch with me, and they'll give you my email. We can set up a time to meet and discuss your situation. Right now, there is no time limit on that. So I've seen alumni from maybe 3 years back that have been in a similar situation and are exploring a job change or something like that. Whenever you graduated, as long as you graduated from Pace, you can come see me. Absolutely.
Great. And the number you can call is 204-982-6633. Or you can always go to our website and you can find it there at pace.uwinnipeg.ca. There's lots of ways you can get in touch with us from that website. Okay, another question. What advice would you give to somebody who's been applying for opportunities but hasn't got a job yet?
So, typically, I'd like to meet with that person and ask a series of questions to try and get to the core of what it is. So, the first question I might ask is, how many jobs have you applied to in the last month, or how many jobs are you applying to per week, per day, etc., to get an idea of how aggressively this person is pursuing jobs. Because it could be that they've only applied to a handful of jobs over the past month or 6 months or whatever the time span may be. And the truth is that online job applications, it's not an efficient way to find work. Typically, we have to apply to a lot of jobs before we actually get an interview. And statistics vary, but I mean, the last statistic I heard is that someone who applies to 1,000 jobs over a certain period of time might get like 10 interview calls or something like
Wow.
that. But again, like I say, most people are not accessing career services, right? Those who do know a bit more about creating targeted resumes and see a lot more success with that. So I would ask how many jobs they're applying to get a feel of how aggressive they're being. Then I'd investigate how many of those jobs have resulted in interviews. If they're applying to a lot of jobs but not getting interviews, that suggests to me it's a resume targeting issue. So we take a look at the master resume, take a look at a sample targeted resume, and test the targeting using something like JobScan to see what level of targeting they're actually doing. Lots of people have an idea that they should be creating a targeted or tailored resume, but are maybe not doing enough targeting to beat the applicant tracking system. So that's kind of clue number two. If they are creating really good targeted resumes and they're getting interview calls but not landing the job, then it's almost undoubtedly a question of interview skills. So we go into interview skills development, then work on those in a general sense, and then start doing mock interviews for more specific roles until those skills are built up. So there's a certain amount of investigation involved.
Sounds like a combination of the dark arts and science to kind of land on the right thing. So, when people apply for any job that I've been kind of on the hiring committee for, and they don't have a cover letter, I always kind of dismiss that. So, how do you feel about the importance of the cover letter versus the importance of the resume, and where do those land with you on
Yeah,
career
and it's
development?
funny because cover letters, I used to be quite dismissive of cover letters. I was a
Mhm.
bit cynical on how many employers actually sit and read them.
Yeah.
But then I've heard feedback from a few employers, much like what you just said, if they don't have a cover letter, we don't feel like we're getting to know the person. And I
Yeah.
think as applicant tracking systems become more prevalent and resumes themselves become a bit more formulaic, and it's really like the resume becomes more about just beating the applicant tracking system and less personalized. I think the cover letter becomes more important in telling the company who you really are, what your values are, how you would fit in the company. So I now tell students that cover letters are very important and they should include a cover letter wherever possible. I also tell students that, resumes target the job ad, cover letters target the company. That's your chance to show why you'd be a good fit in the organization. And it can also be the difference between, sometimes you can do everything right, interview right, be a good fit for the job, but not get that job. But a good cover letter could be the difference between that company going, you know what, we can't put you in this role, but we really like your fit
Yeah.
and I'd like to see if we can find something else for you. And it does happen.
Yeah.
And I think a cover letter plays a big part in that.
I
So
love a good cover letter.
yeah, exactly. Well-written cover letter goes a long way.
It really does.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I think as long as, if someone puts effort into a cover letter and there's so many easy ways to, chat GPT, make me a cover letter, and it just sounds robotic and formulaic. But if you take the time to write a really good cover letter, and it does take time, especially if you're going to kind of target each company, but it can make a real difference in your application strength.
Okay, thank you. So, when you came to PACE, you came with a background in this area as well as other areas. And so you had a lot of connections within the industry. So, can you tell us more about the webinars and the partner presentations that you've brought to the area and how those resources benefit our students?
Absolutely. So I've mentioned Manitoba Start a couple of times. They're a wonderful immigrant serving
Hmm.
organization, and I used to work for them before coming to PACE full time. So I've done three partner presentations, I think we have now with them. So the transitional work presentation that I mentioned helps students interested in finding a part time job while they study. So those outside of PACE may not know, but we take in students. Most of our programs begin at three specific points during the year. And so I schedule a transitional work presentation with Manitoba Start for about 4 to 6 weeks after each start point so that students are getting that information quite early on. We give them a few weeks to settle in and focus on their studies, but they're getting that access to that early on. But we're also doing LinkedIn. Like I said, this afternoon, Manitoba Start's doing that for us. And then Canadian Workplace Culture, which was a very popular one we had a month or two ago. I have a relationship with Safe Workers of Tomorrow, who did a employer. Uh, um, Sorry, I've forgotten the name of it now, but employers' rights and things like that. They did a presentation on Manitoba Labor Code, employment standards. Sorry, is the name of the presentation. So they talk about what rights a worker has within Manitoba in terms of disability, time off, things like that. I say common knowledge, but knowledge actually, the first time I saw it, I was blown away by how much and I mean, I'm an immigrant, but I've lived in Manitoba my whole adult life, and I didn't know most of this stuff about, what you're entitled to as an employee and what your rights are. So they're a great organization to have, and they're going to come back and do one in January for us on workplace safety. And then I'm working with Winnipeg Police Service to get a kind of frauds and scams presentation so we can get some information on what to look out for and keep our students safe. So, like I said, a variety of these kind of not career development topics, but adjacent topics that will kind of support what we're doing in career development.
Uh, Speaking of LinkedIn, you mentioned there's going to be a LinkedIn webinar through Manitoba Start this afternoon. How important is LinkedIn in kind of growing your career in Canada and getting your dream job?
I would say very, and I say that kind of with a groan because I'm not a big social media person.
Yeah.
I wasn't on LinkedIn when I was a teacher. I never kind of bothered with it. It's only as a career development professional that I got into LinkedIn, and now I check it every day. And I don't necessarily like that I have to, but it is a part of our reality as professionals in, the not just the Manitoba labor market, but, I mean, the world labor market. Most professionals need to be on LinkedIn, for networking purposes, and I mentioned earlier that online job applications is what most people think they have to do to get a job, but it's actually statistically inefficient. Only about
Mhm.
20% of jobs are gained through an online application. Most people who get a new job, the other 80%, are hired through a combination of, well, I mean, really kind of networking and stuff. So it could be a headhunter on LinkedIn that sees someone they like and contacts them. But really, the biggest single thing that gets people jobs is networking. About 45% of all jobs are gained through networking opportunities, including online networking like LinkedIn, but also in-person events like job fairs and corporate events and things like that, organizational events. So I do occasionally get students. I met with one about 2 days ago who told me, I don't want to do LinkedIn. I don't like online stuff. So I said, okay, that's fine. You can cut that out. But it means you need to be going to networking events and stuff like that if you want to increase your chances, even more so than most students who are not on LinkedIn, because that's such a big component of not only finding a job, but kind of advancing your career throughout.
Yeah. For me, LinkedIn, like somebody applies, I kind of look at LinkedIn and check out their stuff. But I get people are, not everyone wants to be on there.
Yeah, it's
Um,
difficult.
so you talked about the networking and how key that is to finding a job.
Yeah.
So what are some tips or strategies you'd share with students on that networking aspect?
So I've actually developed a networking webinar just these past couple of weeks, and we're going to debut that one next week, I think, is
Now come
the
into that
first.
one.
You're coming to that?
I'm gonna come to that
That's
one. That
good.
sounds good. Yeah.
Good. You can tell me what you think. But I'm going to talk about, I mean, we'll do a little bit on the importance of networking, summarizing what I've just mentioned here about, how important it can be to kind of job search. But I'm really trying to focus on in-person networking because, like I said, occasionally I get students who don't want to do LinkedIn, but most of our students are very tech savvy. They're already set up on LinkedIn. Their LinkedIn profiles are better than mine, and I can't help tell them too much about that because they're pretty good already. But in terms of that in-person networking, building relationships, introducing themselves properly at a job fair, I feel like that's a place where many, many people struggle. And it's a nerve-wracking thing. And I'm not good at networking events. I've never been that person who can just walk up to someone and wow them immediately. It takes preparation. And again, it's kind of like the job interview. Most people don't realize they can prepare for these things and increase their chances by taking some time in advance to do certain things. So we're going to outline some strategies to prepare for networking events, to make the most of your time at a networking event, and other kind of tips and tricks for being successful at those types of
Yeah,
networking
networking,
situations.
it doesn't come natural to people. Myself, it's you
It's
have to
hard.
work at it.
It's
It's
really
hard.
hard.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
it's difficult even as someone who has a job, a successful career, it can still be daunting to go up and kind of talk about yourself. It's not a natural thing for most people. And I think for someone who is maybe just graduating and doesn't have that first job in Canada yet or that first professional job, nerves can play a real big part in that. So my goal is to help students prepare and be confident enough to talk about their PACE educational experiences, their background experience, and so on, and present that in a way that's going to make them stand out from the crowd.
Awesome. I wish I had that when I when I was a student. We need more Francises in the world. There is a question, and I'll actually answer. It's about a program. So the question is there a project management or executive MBA for the evening? We're just about to launch a project management program. It's been called Advanced Project Management and Technology. Keep an eye out, keep checking our website, it's coming, but we don't have executive MBAs, but we do have an evening, applied project management certificate as well for people who wanna do something online and in the evenings, and we're super flexible. So just I'd say look at our website, there's lots of options for different types of courses there. Um, so I think I there's no questions that have come in, so if you do have questions, please pop them in. We do have time, but, I have one more kind of specific question for you. So, a lot of our students are working while they're going to school, which is kind of a common thing. So what tips would you give for them to balance building those personal connections, networking while they're studying?
Oh my goodness, yeah, it's very difficult because, I mean, PACE programs are intensive. There's, classes and assignments and what have you, just like with any course of study. Most of our students are international students, so they're trying to max out that 20 hours a week, they're able to work in addition to their studies, and I mean, a past full-time responsibility right there. It's a lot to fit in networking events and what have you as well. I think one of the incredible things about PACE is the number of networking opportunities that we bring to students, and our student life coordinator, Nikki, is fantastic at bringing employers to the classroom, and that's a huge, huge help for students who then don't have to. I mean, they still should go to job fairs and stuff like that and make the most whenever they're available to, but there is gonna be a certain amount of networking that is brought to you, as a PACE student, and I think that's massively helpful for that balance.
Yeah, I that's a really good point, and
Mhm.
we're gonna be doing another Ask Me Anything on, the services that we bring to students, but we do have a lot of different employers, come in and do presentations right to our students, so that's a really great way of balancing, still making those connections. Great, so I wanna hear from you, like, do you have any success stories on how your career services and your resources have helped students kind of achieve their career goals?
Absolutely. If, without naming names, I mean, I'm very pleased to have been able to help a number of students who, and like I said, it's most of what I do seems to be interview preparation. And I think that's because we have the resume building course. Many students attend the resume development webinar I do. So by the time they kind of get to the end of the studies, resumes are pretty good. Most of the resumes I see don't need a lot more work to develop them and be ready for those postgraduate applications. So I do a bit of resume work with students, but interview skills seem to be the one place where people really need that help. And I frequently work with students who are very nervous or very negative about their interview skills. They don't think they're good in interviews. And that's why one of the reasons why doing the mock interviews with students is one of my favorite parts of my job, because they get through that mock interview, and I don't take it easy on them, Stevie. They're pretty hard on them, and but they get through it, and we talk about what makes a good answer and stuff as we go along, and they get to the end of it. Oh, I can do this. That's great. And then I help a student prepare for a specific interview. So whenever a student I'm working with gets a job interview, I tell them book an appointment with me 2 or 3 days in advance. Send me the job ad. I'll scour that job ad. I'll look up the company online and try to get some specific questions. And it's almost like a challenge for me, because then I ask them after their interview, how many questions did I correctly predict? Kind of thing. So we're able to, like I said, do a pretty good job of guessing what they might ask about, and I think that really helps students to prepare. So, a lot of students tell me that's very useful to them, and that makes me feel really good. So we have a lot of success stories, particularly around successful job interviews that might not have been a success. There might have been a confidence issue, or a not prepared enough issue
Oh,
without that kind of support. So I'd like to think that makes a pretty big difference to students, hopefully.
yeah. That's great. Like, besides all the resources, it sounds like you're really making a connection and you're building relationships with these students
Absolutely.
to build their confidence. That's amazing. Thank you for doing that.
That's my play.
I'm learning about all the things you do, so, this is
Now when you hear me across the hallway, you'll have a better idea of what's going
exactly,
on.
exactly. Um, I don't see any more questions. Is there any final things you wanna share with the people joining us?
Yeah, and I think we've talked a lot about networking and what we're doing to help students, and again, PACE students are very busy, as we know. So Nikki does a great job of bringing employers in. We're also working on, I can't say too much about it, but there's a PACE career fair maybe around the corner. So we'll have increased opportunity to put PACE students in front of employers in the building, coming soon. So we're really excited about that. So stay tuned to PACE News for more about that in the new year.
That's great. I love a good career event.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, so thanks everyone for joining us today and for your great questions. Big thank you to Francis for sharing such valuable insights into our career services and how you and PACE is supporting our students achieve those goals that they so want to achieve. So if you have more questions or want to learn about PACE, what we have to offer, connect with us through our website. It's pace.uwinnipeg.ca. Really easy to remember. Or you can always call 204 982 6633. And be sure to follow us on Instagram to stay up to date on future events and resources. So, thanks again for being part of today's session. And remember, at PACE, we're here to help you succeed every step of the way. Have a great day.